Hi, and welcome to my videos to help you on your calligraphy journey. This video, it's today gonna be focused on color, but color not as a type of ink and color of the ink, but what I called and what it is called typographic and calligraphic color. What is type color? Color is an element of typography that describes how dense or heavy the text appears on the page. Finding the right balance of positive and negative forms can make text more easily readable. This is the typographic definition of color. This translated in calligraphy means how dense or light the amount of text on a page can look like. And we are going to start working on a long word, and we are going to do a couple of examples. After that, I will show you a couple of examples of how you can experiment and learn to create different calligraphic colors on the page, depending if you want a very, very dark mark or a really light mark. If we think about black letter, and the name of black letter itself is related to how dark the appearance of the text was on the page. So that is basically the definition of a black letter. So in Copperplate Calligraphy, we can still decide and modify the type of color depending on a few aspects. So we are going to talk about the spacing and contrast to begin with, and then I'm going to talk about other aspects like line spacing and density. So I'm going to start with the word minimum. I just did the X height for 1 unit, but I'm actually going to go with 2 units. So if you need blank calligraphy guidelines, like the one that I'm using underneath my page, so see what I'm using in here. If you need blank guidelines, you can find them by following me on Instagram and then going into the link on my bio, where you will find a link for the guidelines. This link is going to take you to my Substack. And after you subscribe to my newsletters, then you will get an automatic email with a link to download them. If you don't see the email, please check your spam or junk folder for it. Okay, so what I have done in here is increase the X height to 2 units. So the word is going to be slightly bigger now. Okay, what happens with color, calligraphic and typographic color? So if I want to create a really, really light look and feel of a group of words, like a text, I'm going to decide that the contrast I want to apply is very, very light. And that means low contrast equals, in Copperplate Calligraphy, low pressure of my pen on the paper. Okay, so now let's write minimum. I'm gonna make sure that I go very gentle with my down strokes so that the look and feel is really light and delicate. So I'm going up and down. And once I have the first down stroke in here that you can see, the point in here is try to replicate as much as possible the look and feel of your down strokes. So currently the contrast level between my up stroke and my down stroke is really small. So let's go. Down. Down. Now, things I'm creating as I'm going. Okay, this eye is slightly thicker. That's okay. I just need to pay attention to it. What I created with the first movement. So with the first movement, I created 1, the level of contrast that I want. 2, how big is my counter space on the first arch, which is going to inform every other element, every other letter in my writing. And 3rd, this counter space now also informs the space between my letter forms. So just with the first letter, I have a lot of information that it's going to dictate the look and feel of the rest of what I'm writing. So I'm doing an N now. And I'm doing an I. If you have watched any of my video series from Intro to Copperplate Calligraphy, you probably are already saying or thinking, oh, I see something is not right here. Oh, I see something. Yeah, I'm sure it is because, as I always mention, every time we do it, every day is different, every letter is different, and we are aiming for consistency, but we are not robots. And that means that the quality of my writing is always going to be slightly different because it's handmade. And if you want something that is exactly the same every time, you better use then a font, which is designed to have like digital consistency. So in here, what I'm talking about that if you watch the Intro to Copperplate Calligraphy, you know that I mentioned when the thin stroke goes up and goes away from the down stroke, it's roughly going in the center of the X height. So yes, I see how the up strokes started a little bit too early in these movements. I have to be okay with that. I'm actually okay with that. I also want to mention something else. On many of my videos, I add notes and I talk about self-evaluation, which for me is a very healthy practice, but I'm gonna say something else in here. Self-evaluation, it is not the same as self-judgment. Because this is the healthy part of learning, and this is the one that it's going to give us trouble and it's going to slow us down because we are going to be very critical and on the perfectionist side of things. And in my opinion, that part is actually not going to help you, but the other way around. Okay, you can see the lightness of this word. And now let's reproduce this in here, adding high contrast. So obviously the mark is gonna be a lot darker. Okay, let's repeat this again. And I'll try to be a lot more intentional with the amount of contrast. Let's go up and down. And you can see by now, everything I did in here now, it's going to be determining everything that is coming after. Just with this movement, I'm already setting the amount of contrast, the width of each arch of the M and the width of every other letter and the counter space. So let's try to keep it consistent. Challenge for me is not making spelling mistakes while I'm talking, especially with a word that is so repetitive like this one. Okay, now self-evaluation time. So what can I say about this exercise in here? The amount of contrast is quite consistent. So I'm happy with that. The spacing between the words and the counter space is quite similar. And of course, you can see the degree of contrast in comparison to the one above. So you imagine now that the whole page is done with this writing or the whole page is done with this writing. And the type of color, it's going to be very different, because in here we will have a very light color, and in here we will have a very dark calligraphic color. Now, there are a lot more elements that come into play when we talk about calligraphic color, because the other element is that I can still apply the same amount of contrast, but I can decide to reduce the counter space. So by reducing the counter space, I know that I'm also reducing the space between letter forms. So let's do number 3 in here. Okay. Something else that it's going to be an element of color is the language. In Spanish, we have a few letters that are going to be a lot more repetitive than in other languages. So the color of the page and the texture of the page is going to be different depending on the combination of letters that we use. In Polish, for example, they use a lot of diacritics. So having a lot of diacritics on the page is also going to modify the calligraphic color because of the characteristics of the language. Now, let's go up. I maintain the amount of the same downstrokes. The thickness of the downstrokes is the same, but now I am reducing the counter space and the space between letters. So I'm getting a very condensed look and feel. Now I'm nearly done. Okay, you can see the length of my word now obviously is shorter, and now I have even more blackness, so calligraphic color is darker. Okay, so other aspects that are going to be modifying the color of a text, as I mentioned here, is I would call it 1, 2, and 3. And then other things that modify, I would say, is number 4, the language that we are using to write the text. Number 5 is a space between between lines. So I'm going to show you now a few examples of how this translates into the calligraphic color. So I'm going to go outside, and you can see here what we have done. And now I'm going to show you what this looks like into an entire page. So let's evaluate what we are looking in here at the moment. So this is an A4. This X height is very similar to the X height we just did now with the demo. And now, what are we seeing in here? So number 1, how can we describe this page? So the X height is larger. The space between the letters is quite narrow. This is a monoline text, means there is no contrast between thin and thick, and the space between my lines is greater than the X height. So the X height and the space between my lines is not the same, it's actually greater. So I have a lot of space and it's really airy and light. Number 2. My writing now has contrast, and it's very rhythmic between the inside and the space in between. Again, I have a very airy space, so the space between lines is greater than the size of my X height. So it is darker, but still I have room around in here for breathing. Number 3. Now, the contrast and the width of my letter forms is the same as previously, but the difference now is that the size of the X height and the space between my lines is exactly the same. So now I'm obtaining a high density text and a very rhythmic pattern where the X height and the leading, which was what we would call in typography, the X height in the space between the letters is the same unit. And finally, number 4, we have the same line spacing, but now the letters are narrower and the space between the letters are narrower, what it makes a text being very condensed. So in here, we have a really dark pattern and we obtain something that is even more dense than the example before. So this example would look very similar to what our black letter or Gothic calligraphy would look like as well, because there is high density on the page. Excellent. I hope this explanation and demo was very helpful, and see you in another video very soon. If you are interested in learning more about materials, I'm putting together a page on my website that is going to be specifically about all the materials that you can use for Copperplate calligraphy. So hopefully that is also helpful for you. Excellent. Thank you so much.